The air over the Mojave Desert in Southern California was a suffocating blanket, thick with dust and the smell of sun-baked sagebrush. For Captain Jake "Maverick" Riley, fresh off a transport flight from the familiar humidity of Langley Field, the heat was a physical enemy, a stark contrast to the sterile high-altitude world he was used to. He was a man of precision, a his reputation built on meticulous analysis of engine performance and structural and unexplained failures. He pulled his battered leather bag from the back, the metal handle searing his. The base, Muroc Army Airfield, was a desolate sprawl of hangars and temporary barracks dwarfed by the endless, shimmering, dry lake bed. This was where the cutting edge of American aviation met the forgotten frontier, a place for secrets to be tested and sometimes buried. Jake was met by Major Eleanor Vance, the base's chief medical officer. She was a woman whose severe uniform and clipped hair did little to soften the relentless fatigue. She carried a thick, classified folder that looked as heavy as a lead ingot. "Captain Riley," she said, her voice dry. "Welcome to the frying pan. I'm Major Vance. I recommend you don't call me Eleanor." "Understood, Major, and I prefer Jake, but I respond to Captain if you're shouting," Jake replied, forcing a lightness he didn't feel. He gestured to the surrounding isolation. "So, this is the center of the mystery, the graveyard of perfect engineering?" Major Vance didn't crack a smile. "This is where 4 of our best P-51D pilots pushed the envelope and where they broke it. The official reports are a joke. Structural fatigue, pilot error due to high G-forces. The truth is messier." She led him into a cramped, airless office. On the wall, 4 framed photographs hung side by side. 4 young men, handsome and confident. Now, a casualty. "Take a look at the flight data," Vance continued, sliding a sheaf of dense telemetry readings across the desk. "In every case, the pilots executed a dive-bombing maneuver that was literally impossible. We're talking about hitting a 3-foot target from 15,000 feet or a 70-degree dive with almost zero correction, precision that makes the Norden bomb sight like a child's toy." Jake raised an eyebrow. "Impossible, you." "So, what's the unofficial theory?" Vance lowered her voice, leaning closer. "The unofficial theory is the only thing the 4 incidents have in common apart from precision. They all stopped wearing their oxygen masks, not just disconnected, but tucked away, at altitudes where hypoxia should have given them tunnel vision and motor failure." Jake frowned, running a hand over the telemetry. "An altitude-induced high? A last moment of clarity before they blacked out? And they managed to score a bullseye?" "It's not a high, Captain. It's a clarity. Their last recorded voice transmissions, they didn't sound panicked or euphoric. They sounded focused, serene. And then silence, followed by the crash. The commanding officers want the engineering failure. They want to fix the wing or the rudder or the oxygen regulator. They refuse to accept that the pilots achieved a kind of impossible perfection by removing their life support. And you think it's more than a fluke? I know it is. I also know that there was a 5th pilot, Lieutenant Miles, who showed the same signs but managed to land his Mustang, mostly in one piece. He's locked down in the infirmary under psychiatric evaluation. He keeps repeating the same 2 things. The air was sweet, and he showed me the line. "Poi diuwaski arn." Jake leaned back, the image of the 4 confident faces on the wall filling his mind. The desert heat suddenly felt colder, replaced by a growing chill of professional unease. This wasn't a mechanical failure, it was a psychological or a biological one. And someone, somewhere, knew the secret to the sweet air. "Who is he, Major?" Jake asked. Vance shook her head, her weariness deepening. "No one knows. But the trail leads to a man who was quietly transferred to this base 2 months ago. A physicist from the Manhattan Project's precursor labs, Dr. Silas Thorne. He's listed as Consultant for High-Altitude Optical Refinement. He reports directly to the General. And he's working entirely alone in a heavily guarded, decommissioned fuel bunker on the edge of the range." Jake took a long breath, adjusting to the new, darker reality of his mission. "All right, Major. Let's start with the one who survived. I need to talk to Lieutenant Miles. Then I need to know everything about Dr. Thorne's optical refinements." He looked at the wall again, at the promise of impossible precision and the cost of the 4 lines. The mystery wasn't in the metal of the P-51, but in the mind of the man flying it. The hunt for the truth had just begun, and it felt like flying blind at 30,000. The engine of the investigation was idling, but the revs were about to climb into a screaming dive. The silence of the desert was, in fact, the deep, unsettling quiet before a crime. The truth, Jake suspected, was far more dangerous than any German flak. Let the mission end here. If the enigma of the sweet air has you gripped, make sure you don't miss the next chapter. Hit that subscribe button and the notification bell so you can follow Jake's descent into the truth. The infirmary was a small, prefabricated hut, air-conditioned to a chilling degree that felt unnatural in the desert. Lieutenant Miles, the sole survivor, lay in a cot, his eyes wide and unfocused, staring at the ceiling as if tracking an invisible aircraft. He was young, his face shadowed by a fear that no amount of combat. The fluorescent light hummed overhead, a sound that seemed to grate on Miles's already frayed nerves. Jake sat, the coldness of the room doing little to dull the intensity of the moment. Major Vance stood near the door, silent guardian, her arms crossed as she watched the corridor, her posture betraying her deep distrust of the entire. Lieutenant Miles, Jake began, his voice low and calm, the tone of a seasoned pilot talking a novice through a rough landing. I'm Captain Riley. We need to talk about your last flight. Can you tell me what happened with your mask? Miles blinked, his gaze finally settling on Jake, a spark of the terror from his final flight still visible. The air, it was sweet, like ozone and cut grass, like pure, clean cold. You took the mask off at over 25,000 feet. Why? Jake asked, pushing him gently. Miles struggled to prop himself up, his eyes pleading. The target, Captain. It was just a blur of smoke and canvas, right? But then I felt this clarity, like a lens turning. Everything snapped into focus. The target, it wasn't a blur. I could see the seam on the canvas, the chip in the paint on the post it was tied to, and the line, Cap. He showed me the line. Tell me about the line. Was it a physical projection, a targeting? A reflection? A canopy? Jake needed tangible proof, something a physicist would recognize. No, it was spatial. A perfect arc, a golden thread showing the bullet's path, the gravity, the wind, everything. It was a certainty. I just had to put the Mustang on that line. Turi. Miles clutched the blanket, his knuckles white. The mask, it was in the way. It was blurring the focus, a distraction. Who is he, the man who showed you the line? Miles's eyes darted nervously to the door, a sharp spike of terror visible on his face, as if Thorne himself might materialize from the shadows. Dr. Thorne. He came into the hangar late, said he was testing a new atmospheric sealant for the canopy. He was friendly, quiet. He offered us a drink, a small glass, said it would help with minor altitude adjustment. He had this gentle way of talking. He was telling you only you were clever enough to hear. He watched me drink it. Major Vance's face tightened by the door, her professional skepticism battling the chilling consistency of the story. He was medicated before we got to it. The stimulant withdrawal can cause extreme paranoia and visual. It's likely delusion. Maybe, Jake said, but the detail about the atmospheric sealant and the metallic water was too specific. What was in the drink, Miles? Water. Tasted like metal. Bitter. But then the air was sweet. Miles's voice dropped to a near inaudible level. I hit the target, Cap. Best shot of my life. But then, my hands, they felt like wood. I couldn't move them. I tried to put the mask back on. I couldn't. I felt the air turning sour, and the line, it shattered. He dissolved into a fit of dry, shuddering sobs, his young body racked with the memory of utter helplessness. I saw them, the others, their Mustang broken, and their faces. They looked surprised, not scared, just surprised, like they'd just missed the most important thing in the world. Jake left the lieutenant in Vance's care, the weight of the testimony settling on him, the G-force of a steep pullout. Outside, the desert sun was setting, painting the sky in aggressive hues of red and orange, a violent end to a day of disturbing revelations. The mystery was no longer about a malfunctioning oxygen. It was about a controlled, deadly experiment. Jake found Vance moments later near the base perimeter fence, staring at a small, heavily guarded bunker in the distance. The deactivated fuel depot, Thorne's lair. The air was turning cool, but the sense of urgency was heating up. I ran the preliminary blood work again, Jake said, her voice strained. He's been giving them some, not just the pilots who crashed. Miles's blood work shows traces of a stimulant, a designer amphetamine we've never seen before. It causes extreme vasoconstriction, narrowing of blood vessels. It's what caused the motor failure, the wooden hands. It's also known to enhance cognitive function under stress for a very short, very dangerous window. The clarity, Jake murmured, the pieces clicking. He's inducing a form of controlled temporary hypoxia. That's why they take the masks off. The drug improves their senses, while the reduced oxygen eliminates the mental chatter, creating a moment of pure, lethal focus. The Mustangs aren't crashing because of the plane. They're crashing because the drug paralyzes the pilot's muscles before the oxygen-deprived brain can tell them to recover or put the mask back on. And the high command sees only the results, Vance said, her eyes burning with cold fury. Impossible accuracy, the perfect weapon. If Thorne can refine the dose, they don't care about the risk. They just want the line. Jake stared at the bunker. He didn't just transfer here, Major. He was hidden. And if he's testing a combat clarity drug, he needs more than one subject. He needs a system. I need to get inside that bunker and find the protocol, the data, everything he's hiding. This isn't science, Vance. It's a murder trial. The wind picked up, swirling the desert dust into a fine, choking screen. It was more than a technical investigation now. It was a hunt, a silent war on his own soil, and the clock was ticking before the next pilot reached for a glass of metallic water. The truth of the Mustang enigma lay behind the steel door of Dr. Thorne's bunker, and Jake knew he had to breach it tonight. Thorne's bunker was a block of concrete and steel, a grim blockhouse nestled into the shifting desert sand, a scar on the landscape. It was protected by 2 armed guards and a cipher lock, but the real defense was its isolation and the blanket of secrecy surrounding Project Phoenix. Jake, using his authority as an official investigator and a fabricated malfunction report on the bunker's external power line, managed to get the guards away long enough for Major Vance to bypass the lock. Using a jury-rigged electrical current and a swift professional touch, they slipped inside, the air immediately turning cold and humid, smelling faintly of ozone and industrial chemicals, a stark contrast to the out. The bunker was not a lab of optics, but a sophisticated chemical facility, complete with gleaming stainless steel reactors and complex distillation columns. The heavy machinery hummed with a low, perpetual energy. This is not a high-altitude optics lab, mate. His eyes scanning the equipment, the sheer scale of the operation alarming him. It's a makeshift drug factory, and a major one at that. Vance moved to a workbench, her gloved hands quickly inspecting glass beakers and meticulously labeled vials. He's been distilling the amphetamine, compound PX, and mixing it with a low-dose sedative and a trace element of metal, probably vials mentioned. The sweet air feeling is a complex reaction. The sedative initially calms the anxiety of the low oxygen, allowing the amphetamine to maximize the cognitive spike, the clarity. She pointed to a residue in one flask. He's creating chemical certainty. Jake moved to a wall of chalkboards covered in complex chemical notations and physiological diagrams. One chart in particular, his blood run cold. It was a graph of dosage charting the chemical journey inside the body. The peak of target acquisition clarity was immediately followed by a steep, irreversible drop into motor incapacitation and subsequent cardiac failure. The 4 dead pilots were not collateral damage. They were meticulously plotted points on a terrifying curve. "He's not trying to save them, Major," Jake said, his voice hard, the full scope of Thorne's malice washing over him. "He's calculating the lethal window. He wants the last moment of their consciousness to be a perfect shot, the ultimate sacrifice for the ultimate weapon. Look, he was scaling up. This is a production facility." Then he found it, a small leather-bound journal tucked beneath a stack of technical manuals labeled Project Phoenix, Final Phase. The cover was plain, but the contents were a chilling blend of scientific log and narcissistic manifesto. Jake quickly translated a key entry, reading it aloud, his voice strained. "The true pilot is not a man of flesh, but a weapon of intention. Oxygen, the crutch of the weak, must be discarded for the singular truth of the target. Formula PX provides the perfect clean slate, a moment where the clutter of self is erased, leaving only the necessary vector. The failures, Vance's term, casualties, are merely proof of the formula's power to enforce the ultimate concentration. I call the moment of absolute focus the nexus. He sees as data point, not men. He's worse than. He's a zealot. Listen to this. The general has authorized 3 new subjects have been prepared for a full combat simulation tomorrow morning. They will receive the optimized PX dose, enough to guarantee a 100% strike rate against the decoy target, but with a calculated 80% survival probability. The remaining 20% are acceptable losses for the promise of the line. Jake slammed the book shut. Tomorrow morning, 3 new pilots. He's not going to stop. He's gambling with their lives to prove his nexus theory. We have to stop the flight. Vance was already moving towards the main distillation unit. I can contaminate the primary batch, make the drug inert, or, better yet, completely toxic. But we have to be quick. If Thorne catches us, we're interfering with a classified general authorized project. We'll be in military prison before the sun rises. As Jake gathered the evidence, the journal, a vial of PX, and the flight protocol, a low rhythmic clanking sound echoed from the far end of the bunker, near the ventilation shaft. Someone was moving. The air, already thick with tension, seemed to solidify into sheer dread. We're not alone, Jake breathed, drawing the .45 pistol he carried for desert hazards. Thorne's back, or he has a technician. Hurry, Major. The suspense was a suffocating pressure. They were trapped inside the sealed concrete block, surrounded by the proof of a terrible crime, and the architect of that crime was now approaching. Every shadow seemed to shift, and the low hum of the machinery became a roar in Jake's ears. They had the evidence, but escaping with it and stopping the flight was now a deadly race. The rhythmic clanking grew louder, confirming Jake's worst fear. It wasn't a technician. It was too precise, too measured. It was Dr. Silas Thorne himself. He appeared from the shadow, a tall, gaunt man in a crisp white lab coat, wearing spectacles that reflected the harsh bunker light. He carried a small, heavy leather satchel. "Captain Riley," Thorne said, his voice smooth and unnervingly polite. "I should have known a man of your reputation for detail would eventually find his way here. And Major Vance, I trust the power malfunction report was necessary for your unauthorized entry." "The malfunction is here, Thorne," Jake retorted, leveling his .45. "It's your twisted sense of morality. 4 men died because of your formula. We have the proof." He held up the leather journal. "Project Phoenix is grounded. The flights tomorrow are off." Thorne gave a soft, condescending chuckle, entirely unthreatened by the gun. "Pilot error, Captain. A simple miscalculation of the motor incapacitation. A tiny adjustment, and the next wave will be perfect. You see only the bodies, Captain. I see the future, the ultimate certainty in air combat. The General understands this. The General hasn't seen the bodies up close," Vance cut in, quickly pouring a measured amount of a caustic chemical into the main distillation chamber. A faint, acrid smoke began to curl from the apparatus. "Your Formula PX is now inert, Doctor. Consider this a termination of the project." Thorne's composure finally fractured. His eyes narrowed, burning with the rage of a thwarted god. He dropped his satchel, revealing not instruments, but a heavy brass fire extinguisher. "You sentimental fools, you have destroyed years of work. Do you have any idea what you have cost the war effort?" He lunged toward Vance, a desperate, unscientific move. Jake fired a warning shot into the concrete floor. The blast was deafening in the confined space, the force rattling the metal shelving. "Stop, Thorne! The experiment is over!" Jake commanded. Thorne paused, his face contorted. Instead of fighting, he suddenly smiled. A cold, calculated expression. "The main batch, yes. But the final optimized dose for tomorrow, Captain, is not here. It is safe. It is already in the hydration tanks of the P-51s awaiting the morning. You can't stop the final test." Jake's heart sank. He knew Thorne meant the cockpit water bottles, the metallic water Miles had described. They needed to reach the hangars and empty those tanks before dawn. "Where is the flight manifest?" Jake demanded. "Which pilots?" "In my office on the base, of course," Thorne sneered, backing toward the service tunnel entrance. "But you can't be in 2 places at once, can you, Captain? If you follow me, the Major will be arrested. If you stay to secure the evidence, I will notify the guards, and the mission will proceed." This was Thorne's final cruel calculation. Jake had to choose: secure the irrefutable evidence or race the night to save the 3 pilots. "Go, Jake! I have the data!" "I'll buy you time," Vance shouted, grabbing a handful of documents and thrusting them into her own pocket. She grabbed the fire extinguisher Thorne had dropped. "Tell the general I said to rot." Jake didn't hesitate. "I'll be back for you, Major." He turned and sprinted towards the exit, his boots echoing against the concrete, the sound swallowed by the deep, cavernous space. He burst out into the cool night air, the desert stars vast and indifferent above him. He had minutes before Thorne alerted the base security. He tore across the runway apron toward the fighter squadron's hangar, the 3 Mustangs, the 3 vessels of death, waiting inside. As he ran, his mind was a whirlwind of calculations and self-doubt. Thorne had engineered a perfect scenario of terror and uncertainty. The growth that Jake had to achieve was not just in courage, but in embracing the unknown and trusting the one person who had stood by him. He had the journal, the evidence, but the human cost was still pending. He reached the enormous, silent hangar door, the metal cold under. The P-51s were sleeping giants, and inside, the Formula PX was waiting to deliver its final, lethal precision. He had to get inside, locate the exact aircraft, and empty the water bottle. He had to disrupt the nexus. The suspense was no longer a question of if the planes would crash, but when they would drink the metallic water and take to the skies for their final clear-eyed dive. The hangar was cavernous, silent, and smelling sharply of aviation fuel, hydraulic. In the deep gloom, 3 sleek P-51D Mustangs stood ready, their silver fuselages catching the faint moonlight filtering through high windows. Jake's heart hammered a frantic rhythm against his ribs. He had to find the water supply and empty it. He scrambled into the cup of the nearest Mustang. His hands, usually so steady and precise on the controls, fumbled for the small insulated canteen rack. The rack was empty. Thorne, he wouldn't leave anything to chance. He moved quickly to the second, and then the third P-51. All 3 canteen racks were empty. The faint metallic scent Miles had described was unmistakable, lingering in the enclosed cockpit. It wasn't just the canteens. It was the aircraft's own built-in hydration system. Jake desperately searched the fuselage near the pilot seat, finally locating the small auxiliary water tank access panel, a feature rarely used in short-range tests. He ripped the panel open. Inside, a small, polished metal reservoir. He pressed the drain valve. A metallic-tasting liquid streamed out onto the concrete floor. He repeated the action on the second and third Mustang, the urgency now a feverish need to eliminate every drop. Just as the last tank drained dry, the floodlights on the hangar floor snapped on, blinding Jake. The door slammed open. "Stand down, Captain Riley." General Wallace, the base commander, stood silhouetted in the entrance, flanked by 2 military police officers, their rifles raised. Standing next to the general, smug and composed, was Dr. Thorne. "You're too late, Captain." "Doctor, Thorne informed me of your unwarranted interference." General Wallace's voice boomed, radiating disappointment and command. "You've destroyed high-value military assets and damaged a critical wartime project. You are under arrest for insubordination and sabotage." "Sir, you have to listen to me. Thorne is a murderer," Jake yelled, climbing out of the Mustang's cockpit, holding the leather journal high. "He's been experimenting on your pilots. 4 men died because of his lethal formula, PX, and 3 more were scheduled to die this morning in the final test. I drained the tanks, but you have to ground the pilots now?" Thorne stepped forward, his tone one of practiced rationale. "A desperate lie, General. Riley is a brilliant but unstable pilot. Major Vance must have corrupted him. She grew overly attached to the test subject. The journal is a fabricated document meant to discredit Project Phoenix. We are 1 hour from the scheduled test flight. The pilots are already in briefing, preparing to make history. Don't let a breakdown stop the ultimate precision weapon." Jake knew he was beaten on the ground. The general saw only the evidence of sabotage and the word of a renowned, if eccentric, scientist. He had to stop the pilots in the air. "General, look at this." Jake pulled a small, sealed vial, the vial of PX he'd grabbed from the bunker, out of his flight suit pocket. "This is the poison. Let me take up a flight. Let me show you what it does." Wallace hesitated, a flicker of doubt crossing his face. "You would risk your life to prove a theory, Captain?" "I risk my life every time I fly, sir. Let me prove the truth. Send up a Mustang. I will be your subject. If I can replicate the impossible shot and land safely, you ground the project and arrest Thorne. If I fail, you were right." It was a desperate gamble, but the only one left. Wallace, a man obsessed with results, saw the opportunity to validate Thorne's work and eliminate a problem officer simultaneously. "Fine. One flight, Captain. Prove your point." 30 minutes later, Jake was strapped into a fresh P-51. He received a sip of the real PX solution from Thorne's satchel, a calculated risk that horrified, who had been brought in under guard, but who could do nothing but. Jake took off, climbing to 30,000 feet. The drug hit hard. The world became hyper-real, every lever and dial a sculpture of perfect purpose. The radio chatter was noise, the cold was irrelevant. He flew to the test range, where the impossible target waited. At 25,000 feet he reached for the mask. He saw the line, a thread of golden certainty leading straight to the target. He followed the instinct of the drug and unclipped the mask, the sweet air rushing in. The clarity was blinding. He dove the Mustang, steep and fast. The ground rushed up, but the line was steady. He fired. Thwack, bullseye. But Jake wasn't paralyzed. He was focused, yes, but he had prepared for the motor incapacitation. He fought the urge to simply hold the stick. He remembered Miles's desperate. He knew the line was a distraction for the final, lethal. If he gripped the stick tighter, pushing his strength against the drug's paralyzing grip. He fought to pull out of the dive, his muscles screaming against the vasoconstriction, using sheer willpower and his knowledge of the plane's limits. He fought the perfect clarity, choosing messy, difficult survival. He didn't hit the perfect pull-out angle, but he made it. He broke the line. Below, the base watched his shaky yet successful recovery. When Jake landed, he was pale, shivering, but alive. He pointed the .45 at the shocked general. "That wasn't precision, sir. That was a moment of chemical certainty, followed by a fight for my life. The line is a lie. Ground the pilots. Arrest Thorne." The general, seeing the recovered plane and the truth etched on Jake's face, finally understood the cold horror of the Mustang enigma. The sight of Jake breaking the deadly spell was enough. Thorne was taken into custody immediately. The true reason Mustang pilots had briefly stopped wearing their oxygen masks was not a tactical secret but a horrifying chemical experiment stopped by one man's refusal to sacrifice his humanity for a moment of unnatural precision. The adventure was over, the mystery solved, and Jake, standing under the bright, clean desert sun, had not just saved lives, but had grown into a true leader, choosing the complicated reality over the simple, lethal line. Thank you for following the thrilling conclusion to the Mustang Enigma. If you want more stories of suspense, mystery, and growth set against the dramatic backdrop of history, make sure to hit that subscribe button and the notification bell. Your support helps us tell these crucial, complex human dramas.